Rocky Mountain Construction is one of the most famous roller coaster manufacturers, and today I'm going to be doing a video all about the RMC before and after. Okay, so if we start off with 2009, Six Flags over Texas had made the decision to remove their former wooden roller coaster, Texas Giant, and this was to make place for this amazing new groundbreaking attraction, and this would be called the new Texas Giant, and this was actually the world's first Rocky Mountain Construction roller coaster. And yes, this did have a quite steep drop. I think it was an 85-degree drop, so yes, it was quite steep, and also the best thing about this ride is it did have lap bars, and yes, at this time it was very rare for these sort of coasters to be having lap bars, as obviously they are intense and thrill roller coasters. So yes, this ride basically just had some airtime moments, it went through various different tunnels, and also it did have some overbank turns, but it did not have any inversions, and this was to wait for the Rocky Mountains Construction's later projects. So yes, this one didn't have any inversions at all, it was a simple layout. So yes, that's what New Texas Giant was. So yeah, it was quite a simple coaster, but it was definitely one of the best coasters ever built. And yes, this did open in 2011. So if we move to the other side of Texas, Six Flags Fiesta Texas removed their Rattler wooden roller coaster in 2012, and this was to make for another amazing hybrid roller coaster, and this coaster would be called Rattler. And yes, this was built in 2013, so they only had a year to build this new groundbreaking attraction. And this was when RMC started to get quite popular, because obviously, basically they used these Gerstlauer trains at this moment in time. As yes, there were only actually two RMCs that used Gerstlauer trains, and this was one of them. But RMC started to get quite popular, so they did obviously add some inversions on. And yes, this was the first coaster to have, this is the first wooden roller coaster really to have inversions on. And yes, this does look amazing. And the first thing you do is go down this amazingly steep drop, straight into tunnels, back up into airtime, and yes, this was actually on the quarry wall. So if you do know Six Flags Fiesta Texas well, you'll know all behind it there is something called a quarry wall. And yes, basically what this was, it was a massive wall, and it was actually quite a famous wall, but all these rides interact with this wall, and this one ride did actually interact with it. And yes, this obviously did have inversions, and yes, this does look amazing. And obviously it did have like high-speed turns, and I think it did have a couple of tunnels as well, and especially the end airtime moment where you fly over, go straight down into that tunnel, does look absolutely amazing. And yes, like this coaster looks like one of the best RMCs ever built. So in 2013, Six Flags Mexico made the decision to remove their old wooden roller coaster, Medusa. And yes, this was again to make room for this new amazing RMC. And yes, this RMC was built in 2014, and it was going to be called Medusa Steel Coaster. And yes, this was the first ever coaster to have the new RMC trains on, and also I presume it's the first ever coaster to have a barrel roll drop. And yes, this drop does look absolutely incredible. It's just the way it comes down that drop at quite a good speed, to be honest, and you go straight into that inversion down the drop. Oh, it looks incredible. But also on this ride, it wasn't only the barrel roll drop that made this ride. You did have some more injector airtime moments that did look incredible. Also, you did have loads more inversions than stuff like Rattler did, and obviously New Texas Giant did, because that didn't have any inversions. So yes, this was a step up from them two roller coasters, and this was definitely going to be the groundbreaking attraction in Mexico when it opened in the 2014 season. So just a couple of months after the Medusa Steel Coaster was built at Six Flags Mexico, Six Flags Magic Mountain made the decision to take away their dueling wooden roller coaster, Colossus. And again, this was to make room for another RMC, and this would actually be a world's first, because it did have the dueling aspect. And yes guys, I am talking about Twisted Colossus. And yes, this did obviously have this was the first dueling hybrid coaster ever built, and this ride did have a high 5 element, had a 0G stall, it had a couple of different inversions as well, had some good injector airtime moments, had some floater moments. Yeah, this ride is just an overall package, and it is absolutely amazing. Something I've got to give credit Six Flags for is actually you don't just go round on one side. Before you go back into the station, you just go round on the green side. I think you start off on the blue side and you end up on the green side. And yes, you just go round for the next ride. So obviously you don't have to queue up all again for it. And this did make the ride time a long ride time, basically. And yes, this coaster is amazing. And this is one of 2 RMCs I've actually ever done. And yes, I've just got to say, this is one of the best roller coasters I've ever done. And in my opinion, it is the best roller coaster I've ever done. So yes, this was definitely a massive step up for the Six Flags Magic Mountain lineup. Okay, so if we go over to New England, we arrive at Six Flags New England, and they did decide to take away their Cyclone wooden roller coaster. And yes, obviously this was to make room for another RMC, and this would be RMC's 5th ever creation. And yes, this does look absolutely incredible. And yes, this would be called the Wicked Cyclone. And yes, the name is absolutely incredible. I personally love the name. And this coaster wasn't actually like any other RMC built. It didn't even have like a steep drop. All it had was turns and some airtime moments. But people do really rave about this coaster. People say it is incredible. And personally, I think it does look very, very good fun. But yeah, I mean, I need to definitely make a trip out there to New England to ride this coaster. Because definitely the high speed turns. And also, as soon as you come down that drop, you go into an overbank turn. And that element, I don't know what it's called. But when you got under the chain lift, just does look absolutely incredible. And obviously you do have some airtime moments. There's no tunnels. I think on set from the brake run, I really do think on the brake run you do have a bit of a tunnel. I'm not sure about that, but I think you do. But yeah, I need to definitely make a trip out to New England to get on this new Wicked Cyclone. Okay, so if we move back to 2007, Kentucky Kingdom did take away their coaster called Twisted Twins, and I presume this was a dueling coaster. I think it was. I think they converted it into one coaster, and again, this was to make room for their 2016 season roller coaster that would be called Storm Chaser. And yes, this just looks incredible. This obviously did have the barrel roll drop as well, but the airtime on this just does look incredible. And this ride was definitely built to give you airtime. And yes, obviously if you did leave a bit of room on your restraint, not so it's too loose, but just a little bit, you would get absolutely incredible airtime on this. It did have a couple of high speed turns as well, but it was quite a low coaster of RMCs. I think it was only about 30 metres tall. But yes, this does look incredible, and just the way it pulls you over the hills and stuff, especially if you're on the second to back row, this would be incredible. But yeah, I would really, really like to get on this coaster, and I'm sure pretty much everyone would love to get on Storm Chaser. It does look amazing, and obviously Kentucky Kingdom does also have their other coaster called Lightning Run, and yeah, these make 2 major coasters at this park. So yeah, and obviously they've now bought the Kentucky Flyer as well. So these are 3 good coasters at this park now. So this park is definitely a park to check out, as obviously they did have this incredible RMC as well. Okay, so if we go back over to Northern California, we would arrive at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. And yes, this park did actually take away their full modern roller coaster in 2015, and this was called Roar. And if you want to go on Roar, there is still another one out there, and this is actually at Six Flags America. And that's near Washington DC, so it is the other side of America, but there is still one out there to ride. But yes, people said this was a bit too rough, so they decided to they made the decision to build this new roller coaster to fit in with their DC area, and this was going to be called the Joker. And this would have one of the best colour schemes of any roller coaster, as obviously it did have the purple and also green on each side of the rail. But yeah, so this did look amazing, and obviously that was to resemble the Joker and the character, which colours he wears and stuff like that. But yes, this was actually an amazing coaster, and like the first drop was actually incredible as well. And yeah, I've ridden this one as well. But yeah, the first drop, you sort of came down that drop, and you had a really high turn. Well, you had a twist on the drop, so that was quite unique. And also, you did have the 0G stall, that was amazing. And yeah, a lot of people don't say this coaster is very good, but personally, I think this coaster is an amazing coaster. And whether it is a good coaster or not, this definitely did fit into Six Flags Discovery Kingdom's lineup. So in 2015, King's Dominion decided to take away their former wooden roller coaster, Hurler, and this was to make way for Twisted Timbers. That is the new attraction at this park, and this is actually the newest coaster they have built so far. And obviously we're in 2020 at the moment, so this was actually only 2 years ago. And Twisted Timbers, if you didn't know, is actually on the thumbnail. So if you look at that picture, that is actually Twisted Timbers. And yes, this is another coaster that had the barrel roll drop. And this coaster was made for airtime again. It wasn't made for inversions, it was just made for pure airtime. And yes, first thing you do is you come down that barrel roll drop, you have an airtime moment, then you go into an overbanked turn, and then you have 3 airtime moments in a row. And yes, I imagine if you're on the second to back row, you would fly out your seat on this. And obviously this was Cedar Fair's first ever RMC they built, and I'm sure they made a really good decision with it, because another coaster I'm going to talk about in a minute is debatably the world's best roller coaster. But yeah, so this coaster is still an amazing coaster, and a lot of people rank it very high in their rankings. Okay, so 2016 was the year that the world famous Cedar Point decided to remove their wooden roller coaster, Mean Streak. And yes, this wooden roller coaster was actually a very tall one, but not many people were disappointed. But the people who were disappointed wasn't disappointed for long, because this made way for this new roller coaster called Steel Vengeance. And yes, this is, well, debatably the best roller coaster ever built, and definitely the best hybrid coaster. And yes, this was one of RMC's best creations, as it obviously is pretty much the best coaster in the world. And you come straight up the lift hill next to Lake Erie, and this is actually over 200 foot. So this was actually the first RMC hypercoaster, and it's not actually, the model's not called an RMC hypercoaster, but it is a hypercoaster if it's above 200 feet. And obviously Cedar Point had built taller roller coasters in the past, but yes, this roller coaster was not a disappointment. You just had airtime moments after airtime moments, injection moments, floater moments, inversions, tunnels, everything you wanted on a coaster is on Steel Vengeance. And some people even say it is too intense, and some people do say after every minute, well, not every minute, like every couple of seconds, you have to have like an element, like an airtime moment or something. But yes, that's what I would love about this coaster, especially if you're sitting again in the second to back row. Just the airtime on this is incredible. And obviously, as you're coming up to it, you would see this 90-degree drop just in front of Lake Erie. And yes, this does look absolutely incredible, and I can definitely see why some people say this is the best roller coaster in the world. Okay, so in 2017, Six Flags over Georgia decided to remove their wooden roller coaster, Georgia Cyclone. And yes, this was to make way for their 2018 new hybrid coaster that would be called Twisted Cyclone. And this was one of the first RMCs to actually have quite impressive theming. And yes, this colour scheme was blue and white. So the track spots were white and the colour of the rails are blue. And yes, this did have a twisted drop as well. And the elements on this are absolutely incredible. And I don't really know what they're called, but as soon as you come down that drop, you go into an inversion and you go back down into another inversion. You also have a wave turn that does look incredible. And there's so much jam-packed into this small coaster. And yes, as I said, this is not a massive RMC like Steel Vengeance that was actually built that year. It was more along the lines of Twisted Timbers or like something like that. Even Storm Chaser of Kentucky Kingdom or something along the lines of that. And yes, the colour scheme on this obviously is incredible, because that blue and white does fit in very, very well. And this will happen with another coaster that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So in 2018, Japan's Nagashima Spireland made the decision to take away white Cyclone, and this was to make room for this new groundbreaking wooden roller coaster, well, hybrid coaster, that was going to be called Hakuge. And yes, this did copy the colour schemes, obviously, of Twisted Cyclone over at Six Flags Georgia, over Georgia, and basically this was, again, well, obviously white and blue, and this was actually a light coloured blue this time, and people say it's visually one of the best coasters ever built, and people even say when you're on it, it is just incredible. And again, this was another big step up for Nagashima Spa-Land, as obviously if you don't know the park very well, well, I didn't until now, but they basically do have the longest roller coaster in the world, and this is called Steel Dragon 2000. And yes, they did just have the B&M trains on, well, a couple of months ago they did actually have the B&M trains on. But yes, so basically this was going to be an amazing RMC, and it did turn out to be one of the best RMCs. But yeah, this obviously was the first RMC out of the United States of America. So yes, this was a very impressive coaster, and this got a lot of people out of America getting into the RMCs and actually starting to enjoy these new types of roller coasters. So in 2018, Wallaby Holland did decide to take away their wooden roller coaster called Robin Hood, and this was to make way for Europe's first ever RMC, and this was going to be called Untamed. And yes, this has got one of the best trains that I've ever seen in my life, and especially once you get to the top of that lift hill, you come down this 85-degree drop, and then you go straight into an airtime range. You've got so many twists and turns, you've got airtime, and this does, the theming on this does look incredible. And yeah, like the logo of this is really good as well, the station's really cool, but yeah, just pretty much everything on here is really good. And obviously like the track colour is like a brownie colour, and yeah, that obviously does look quite good as well on the track. I gotta say, I do wish it was white and blue, but if they make too much RMCs white and blue, a lot of people will get a bit fed up of it. But yes, that was Europe's first ever hybrid or RMC coaster. Okay, so that wraps up this video here on NTPC, and just before we end, I do want to say that this was only to 2019, as obviously they haven't built any new RMCs in 2020. Well, if they did, it got pushed back to 2021. And obviously I would have added in the new Iron Gwazi, but obviously that is opening in 2021, so I decided not to add that in. But yes, another reason is basically I didn't add in a couple of the RMCs, if you realise, like Railblazer or even Lightning Rod or Goliath at Six Flags Great America. And the reason because of that is there wasn't actually an old wooden roller coaster there before. And the reason why I titled this video Before and After, because it literally is the RMC coaster before and now the RMC coaster basically. But yeah, so that wraps up this video here on NTPC, and I hope you've enjoyed the latest couple of videos and the latest voiceover videos. And if you have, make sure to leave a comment down below, and also make sure to leave a comment down below what is your favourite RMC coaster. But that wraps up this video here on NTPC, and goodbye.